Hello team, in this we're going to talk about service meshes. So service meshes provide orchestration for microservice communications. So with service meshes we get load balancing between multiple instances of one microservice. We get service discovery. So when the auto-scaling system, for example, scales up one of our microservices, so there's going to be new instances of that microservice running. So the service mesh will allow existing microservice to discover those new instances, and then the new instances will get load and we get load balancing. A service mesh also helps us secure communications between microservices, and it also monitors all exchanged requests and network traffic. And a service mesh can be used to manage service-to-service communication, so that is internal communication inside an application when one microservice talks with another. And it can also manage client-to-service communication. So a client here could be a user accessing a service or another service accessing our service. So let's get an idea of how a service mesh operates with an example. So here we're back to our image processing application, and it has an external API that users and other applications use to access our image processing app. And here we have the transforms microservice. So if our image processing application gets a lot of users, and if they're running a lot of transforms, the orchestration system might auto-scale our transforms microservice, instantiating new instances. Now, we might have multiple instances of the transforms service, but now how does the external API balance load across these multiple instances? So what we would like is that about 25% of the requests reach each of these instances. But if we want to do this, we might need to add code to the external API so that it knows how many transforms instances are running and then spreads the requests equally across them. And this is a lot of additional code that's not related to the business logic of processing images, which is what our application is supposed to do. So it would be better if we had another solution to balancing load. And this is where the service mesh comes in. So the service mesh interposes between communications of microservices, and the service mesh gets us functionality. For example, load balancing. So here we have this proxy agent that is attached to the transforms microservice, and on the external API we have a service mesh proxy. So what happens is when we get a request from the outside world, the external API will send this request to the service mesh proxy. Now the service mesh proxy will send the request to the proxy agent, and the way in which the service mesh proxy does this forwarding is entirely independent from how our microservice operates. So here the service mesh can balance load, can monitor how many requests per second we're getting. It can secure this communication by using encryption and updated certificates, so it can take care of the communication for us. And then the proxy agent will receive requests from the service mesh proxy and then forward them to our transforms service. And our transforms service will operate just as it did before. So it's going to get a request and compute a response and send it back to the proxy agent. Now, the cool idea about service meshes is that we can add proxy agents to our microservices without changing anything in the microservice. So how do we do this? To understand how this works, we need to remember that microservices use standard protocols to communicate with other microservices. For example, we might use gRPC or REST to exchange messages with other microservices. The proxy agent also understands these protocols. So it receives a request from the service mesh proxy and then forwards it to our microservice using the API that our microservice supports, be it REST or gRPC. So our transforms microservice doesn't need to be changed. So if it was using gRPC before, it will still use gRPC, but now instead of talking with other microservices directly, it will talk with the proxy agent. And then the proxy agent will interpose between communications with other microservices. And again, because the proxy agent interposes all communications, it can secure them, can monitor the amount of communications that we have, so we get all of these functionalities from the service mesh as well. And one last functionality that I'd like to discuss is that a service mesh allows us to expose different interfaces for a microservice. So here we have the external API to our image processing application. And let's say that by default, we implemented a gRPC interface. So we get gRPC requests from clients and other services. Now, if we also wanted to export a REST interface, what we could do is, just implement a REST interface, and that's okay, we can always do that. But alternatively, and this is easier to do, we can have a service mesh proxy expose the REST interface for us. So the service mesh proxy will expose the REST interface whenever it receives a request that comes in REST format. It will convert this request to gRPC, which is what our microservice understands, and then it will send this request to our microservice in gRPC format. So it does this translation between REST and gRPC for us.